Welcome to Cybersecurity HQ's Deep Dive. It's December 2nd, 2024. We're diving straight into today's cybersecurity news.
Let's kick things off with AWS. They've launched a new service, AWS Security Incident Response.
I was reading about that. It looks like they're trying to make incident management a lot smoother, especially in cloud environments.
Exactly. It automates a lot of the triaging, has pre-configured notifications, and it integrates with existing AWS security tools.
Like Security Hub and GuardDuty.
Yeah.
Right. I'm curious to know how that integration actually works.
It gives security teams the central view of their security posture, so they can respond to incidents faster and better. Plus, it includes 247 access to AWS's CART, their Customer Incident Response Team.
Wow, so you're getting direct access to AWS experts during a major security event. That's a pretty big deal.
Right. It seems like AWS is really stepping up their game and helping companies manage security incidents. Now, let's switch gears to some interesting research out of South Korea.
Okay, what have they found?
Their Bob cybersecurity program, that's best of the best, has come up with a prototype for a UEFI bootkit. They're calling it BootKitty.
I read a bit about that. It targets Ubuntu Linux systems, even ones with secure boot, right?
Exactly. It uses this exploit they call logo fail, which goes after a specific vulnerability. CVE 2023-4do38.
Secure boot is supposed to stop unauthorized code from running during startup, so how does BootKitty bypass that?
It injects malicious code during the boot process, basically getting around the secure boot protections.
This is just a research project right now, but it does show that attackers are finding ways to target firmware.
And what makes it even more worrying is that this vulnerability affects devices from major manufacturers: Lenovo, Acer, HP, Fujitsu.
Okay, that's not good.
Yeah.
It seems like no part of a system is truly safe. Speaking of threats, did you see the crazy number of mergers and acquisitions in cybersecurity last month?
Yeah, November was a record-breaking month. 49 deals closed. It shows how much the industry is consolidating.
It does make you wonder about competition, though, doesn't it? Are we going to see a few big players dominate everything?
It's a valid concern. But there are definitely benefits to this consolidation too, like more comprehensive solutions and bigger investments in research and development.
It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Okay.
Okay, moving on. There's a critical vulnerability that was discovered in Zabbix.
That's a popular open source network monitoring tool. And this vulnerability is serious. It's CVE 2024-42327, a CVSS score of 9.9.
So basically, as bad as it gets. What kind of risk are we talking about here?
Think data breaches and system compromise. Attackers can execute arbitrary SQL queries with this one.
How many systems are we talking about? Are a lot of organizations using Zabbix?
Over 83,000 Zabbix servers are publicly exposed, just based on showed-in scans.
That's a lot of potential targets. Hopefully people have patched their systems by now.
The patches have been out since July, so there's really no excuse. And on a related note, there have been a couple of cyber attacks on NHS hospitals in the UK.
Healthcare systems seem to be constantly under attack.
Yeah. The first one hit Alder Hey Children's Hospital. The ransomware gang, Inc. Ransom, is behind this one. They got their hands on sensitive data, patient records, donor reports, the works, and then they leaked it all online.
That's awful. What about the second attack?
This one hit Wirral University Teaching Hospital. We don't know for sure if it was ransomware, but there was some suspicious activity that caused system shutdowns and service disruptions.
Healthcare organizations are already stretched thin, and then they have to deal with this on top of everything else.
Absolutely. And in a bit of good news, a Russian hacker, Mikhail Pavlovich Matveev, was recently arrested. You might know him by his alias, Wazawaka.
That name rings a bell. Wasn't there a bounty on his head?
$10 million. He was linked to some big ransomware attacks, Lockbit, Hive, and Babook, just to name a few.
He went after a lot of high-profile targets, didn't he?
Hospitals, airlines, even government organizations, and critical infrastructure.
This arrest has to be a major win for law enforcement agencies around the world. Maybe it'll slow down some of these ransomware gangs.
Let's hope so. This could also be a sign that Russia might be changing its stance on cybercriminals. We've been putting pressure on them to crack down on these activities for years. Now remember SmokeLoader, that nasty malware downloader?
Oh yeah, the one with the modular design. I thought we were done with that one.
Think again. It's back, and it's targeting Taiwan this time, specifically their IT and manufacturing sectors.
What's it delivering these days?
All sorts of nasty stuff. Ransomware, spyware, banking trojans. It's even still exploiting old vulnerabilities.
Like?
CVE 2017-0199, to give you one example. It shows you that patching those legacy systems is still so important.
It's amazing how some of this old malware Just keeps coming back.
Yeah, it seems like they're constantly finding new ways to use it. And while we're on the topic of threats, there's a new Android malware making the rounds called SpyLoan.
SpyLoan, what does it do?
It's being spread through these malicious loan apps on the Google Play Store.
So they're tricking people who are looking for quick loans.
Exactly. They promise these quick and easy loans, but they're really after your data. Contacts, SMS messages, financial information, you name it. And they use it for extortion.
That's pretty scary. How widespread is this?
It's already affected over 8 million devices globally. Mexico, Colombia, Senegal, and Thailand seem to be hit the hardest.
This is another reminder, be super careful about the apps you download, especially if they're offering financial services.
Now, for some good news, Interpol just wrapped up a huge global cybercrime operation called Operation HAECHIV.
I saw some headlines about that. It sounds like a big win. What were the results?
They made over 5,500 arrests and seized over $400 million in illegal assets.
That's a massive blow to cybercriminal networks. What were some of the key targets they went after?
One of the biggest successes was taking down a voice phishing ring operating out of South Korea and Beijing. They had managed to steal over $1 billion from their victims.
Wow, that's a huge amount. It seems like they also focused on raising awareness about cryptocurrency scams, right?
Yeah, with Cyber Monday coming up, they issued a warning about the USDT token approval scam, which specifically targets crypto investors.
That's a good reminder for everyone to double-check those transactions and make sure they're dealing with legitimate platforms.
And on the topic of ransomware, there's been some movement on the Phobos ransomware gang.
I know that name. They've been hitting a lot of different targets, haven't they?
Businesses, nonprofits, schools, government agencies, they're not picky. The U.S. Department of Justice recently indicted Evgeny Titsin, the leader of this gang.
So they're actually going after the people behind these attacks. That's good news.
It is a positive development. Their strategy has been interesting, though. They don't just go after big companies.
They're more focused on smaller organizations, right?
Yeah. And their ransom demands are generally pretty low, just a few $1,000s in a lot of cases.
It sounds like they're trying to cast a wide net and get as many victims as possible, quantity over quality.
Exactly. And it's been working. They've already extorted over $16 million.
Okay, that's a sobering reminder that no organization is too small to be a target. Speaking of the big picture, the cybersecurity market is booming.
No kidding. Projections are showing that it'll reach $542.3 billion by 2032.
That's incredible growth. What's driving this trend?
Well, for one, cyber attacks are becoming more frequent and more sophisticated. And then you have the adoption of cloud computing and mobile devices, which is expanding the attack surface. Plus, more and more organizations are finally starting to take cybersecurity seriously.
It's about time. I'm sure the 93% rise in ransomware incidents in 2023 also played a role in pushing organizations to invest more in cybersecurity.
Absolutely. And let's not forget about the rapid advancement of AI and ML. These technologies are changing the game when it comes to threat detection and response.
And on top of all that, you have new regulations like GDPR and CCPA, which are forcing organizations to prioritize data security and compliance. Now, I want to talk about this new type of attack I've been reading about, scam yourself attacks.
Yes, those are nasty. They trick people into compromising their own devices.
It's like a twisted form of social engineering, right?
Exactly. They play on your psychology and manipulate you into doing what they want.
I saw a report that said these attacks have gone up by 614% recently.
That's according to Gen, the company behind Norton, Avast, Avira, and AVG. They've seen a huge spike in these types of attacks.
What are some examples of these scam yourself attacks?
There are a few common ones. Fake tutorial attacks, where they lure you to malicious websites disguised as helpful guides. Quick fix attacks, where they impersonate tech support to get remote access to your device.
So they're really playing on people's desire to get help with their tech problems.
Right. And then you have fake EKCHA prompts and fake update prompts, which are designed to trick you into clicking on bad links or downloading malware.
It's a reminder that we need to be extra cautious online and skeptical of anything that seems too good to be true. Now, shifting gears, let's talk about the challenges faced by the public sector in terms of cybersecurity.
Governments around the world are really struggling to keep up with the increasing sophistication of cyber attacks.
They're prime targets because they hold so much sensitive data.
Take Canada, for example. They've seen a huge surge in attacks against government institutions.
And it's not just Canada, right? This is a global problem.
Absolutely. Governments are facing a complex and constantly evolving threat landscape. And to make things worse, there's a massive shortage of skilled cybersecurity professionals.
I read that in Canada alone, 1 in 6 cybersecurity jobs are unfilled.
And it's not just a Canadian problem, it's a global one. This skills gap is making it really hard for governments to defend their networks and systems effectively.
And on top of that, they're often dealing with outdated infrastructure and legacy systems, which makes them even more vulnerable.
Let's not forget about the financial impact of data breaches. They're becoming more and more costly.
I think I saw a report that said the average cost of a data breach is now over $4 million.
That's right, $4.45 million to be exact. And for breaches that involve 50 million records or more, the average cost jumps to $388 million.
That's a lot of money. It seems like companies are still making the mistake of cutting cybersecurity budgets.
They think they're saving money in the short term, but they're actually increasing their risk of a major breach, which could end up costing them way more in the long run.
It's a classic case of penny wise and pound foolish.
And speaking of organizations that need to step up their cybersecurity game, let's talk about startups.
Startups are often so focused on growth and innovation that they neglect cybersecurity, which makes them easy targets.
They're often working with limited resources and don't have the budget for robust security measures.
But a cyber attack could be devastating for a young company.
It could lead to financial losses, reputational damage, and even business failure.
So what can startups do to protect themselves?
They need to invest in some essential cybersecurity tools, even if they have to start small. Firewalls, endpoint security solutions, network monitoring tools, these are all critical.
And they need to think about protecting their customers' data, too. Things like data loss prevention solutions and multi-factor authentication are a must.
It's about building a strong security foundation from the start. Now let's talk about a topic that's becoming increasingly important: the role of CFOs in cybersecurity.
Traditionally, cybersecurity has been seen as an IT issue, but that's changing.
CFOs are being called upon to play a more active role in cybersecurity strategy and decision-making.
Why is that?
Cybercriminals are increasingly targeting financial processes, things like payroll, accounts payable, and wire transfers.
They're going after the money directly.
Exactly. And one of the most common ways they do this is through business email compromise, BEC attacks.
Where they trick employees into transferring funds to fraudulent accounts.
Right. So CFOs need to be more than just number crunchers these days. They need to understand the cybersecurity landscape and work closely with security teams to protect their organizations.
Speaking of leadership, the return of Donald Trump to the White House has a lot of people wondering what's going to happen with cybersecurity policy in the United States.
It's definitely a hot topic. There are a lot of potential changes on the horizon, especially when it comes to CISA, international collaborations, and critical infrastructure protection.
What's the biggest concern about CISA?
Well, during his previous term, Trump proposed reducing CISA's authority or even dismantling it altogether.
So there's a real fear that he might try to weaken CISA's role in cybersecurity.
Exactly. And when it comes to international collaborations, Trump has historically favored bilateral agreements over multilateral ones.
Which could impact global cooperation and information sharing, right?
Exactly. Especially with our European allies who prefer working within a multilateral framework. Another concern is critical infrastructure protection.
Given Trump's preference for deregulation, there are worries that he might try to roll back some of these cybersecurity standards for critical sectors.
Like energy, healthcare, and transportation. It's definitely something to keep an eye on.
The future of U.S. cybersecurity policy is very much up in the air right now. Now, let's talk about a story that highlights the growing vulnerability of supply chains. Blue Yonder, a major supply chain technology firm, was recently hit by a ransomware attack.
This attack had a ripple effect, disrupting operations not only for Blue Yonder, but also for their clients, including Starbucks and Morrisons.
Blue Yonder software is used to manage inventory, logistics, and warehousing, so this attack had a real impact on their clients' ability to get products to consumers.
It's a stark reminder that organizations need to prioritize supply chain security and make sure their partners are taking cybersecurity seriously.
It's all connected. Now let's move on to some good news. Evangelos Bitikas, a doctoral student at Northeastern University, just won a Google PhD fellowship for his research on wireless network vulnerabilities.
His work is focused on identifying and mitigating vulnerabilities in wireless networks, particularly those related to SMS-based tracking exploits and the security of 5G networks for drones.
That's important work. Wireless networks are becoming more and more critical, and we need to make sure they're secure.
And finally, let's talk about a technology that's both exciting and potentially risky: Agentic AI.
I'm intrigued by agentic AI. It's a type of AI that has a lot more autonomy, right? It can make decisions and take actions without human intervention.
Exactly. It has the potential to revolutionize a lot of industries, but it also introduces some new cybersecurity risks.
Like what?
Well, because agentic AI systems have more access to data and more decision-making power, they could accidentally expose sensitive information or make unauthorized changes to systems.
So we need to be very careful about how we develop and deploy agentic AI.
Absolutely. Security needs to be baked in from the start.
Now let's wrap up this part of our deep dive with a discussion about accountability in government cybersecurity.
It's an important topic that doesn't get enough attention.
Governments hold a vast amount of sensitive data, making them prime targets for cyber attacks. But they often struggle with accountability when it comes to cybersecurity.
We need stronger policies and mechanisms to hold government employees and leaders accountable for cybersecurity lapses.
Things like stricter enforcement of policies, mandatory security awareness training, and clear consequences for negligence.
Transparency is also crucial. We need to know how government agencies are performing when it comes to cybersecurity.
Maybe something like agency scorecards that are publicly available.
That's a great idea. It would encourage better compliance and create more accountability.
And finally, let's end with a quick reminder about the importance of patch management.
IBM just disclosed some critical vulnerabilities in its Security Verify Access appliance.
And one of them is particularly nasty, CVE 2024-49803.
It has a CVSS score of 9.8, which means it's very serious. It allows for remote code execution.
So an attacker could potentially take complete control of the appliance.
Exactly. Organizations need to patch their systems immediately.
And on that note, let's take a break. We'll be back soon with more cybersecurity news and insights.
Stay tuned. The EU is also stepping up their cybersecurity game. They've got these new regulations that are all about collaboration.
Because cyber threats don't really care about borders.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're focusing on a more unified approach.
So what are they actually doing to make that happen?
Well, for one, they're putting in place a centralized alert system so they can share information about threats and vulnerabilities much faster.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Faster detection and response across all the member states. What else are they doing?
They're also setting up these emergency mechanisms for when, a really big cyber incident happens.
So they've got a plan in place for a coordinated response.
Yeah, think coordinated response efforts, cross-border assistance, that kind of thing.
That's good to know. They're also providing technical assistance to member states, right?
Yep. They're offering expertise and support to help countries strengthen their cybersecurity, training programs, vulnerability assessments, incident response planning.
Sounds like they're really trying to cover all bases. Now, shifting gears for a moment, let's talk about Trellix.
They recently released a patch for their Enterprise Security Manager platform.
ESM, right? What's this patch all about?
It fixes a vulnerability that could let attackers get into the platform's internal Snow Service API.
So, unauthorized access, potentially exposing sensitive data?
Yeah, it's a pretty serious vulnerability. Organizations using ESM should definitely patch their systems as soon as possible.
Speaking of serious threats, India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, recently addressed the growing issue of cybercrime at a national security conference.
He really stressed the importance of securing critical infrastructure, especially ports.
That's an interesting angle. We don't always think about the physical security of those kinds of facilities.
He emphasized that cybersecurity in the maritime domain is absolutely crucial for national security and economic stability.
Makes sense. What else did he talk about?
He also brought up the growing threat of digital fraud and AI-based crimes. He's urging law enforcement agencies to adopt more technology-driven approaches to stay ahead of these evolving threats.
So basically, modernizing their tactics and tools.
Exactly. He's calling for technology-driven reforms in urban policing, things like using AI and data analytics to improve crime prevention and response.
Sounds like India's taking a proactive stance on cybersecurity.
They recognize that these threats are constantly changing and they need to adapt to stay ahead of the game.
So before we wrap up, any other news we should touch on?
Well, it's always good to remind people about patching, right? We were just talking about Trellix ESM.
Right. They released a patch for that vulnerability.
And it's a critical one. Attackers could get access to the platform's internal Snow Service API.
So definitely not something to ignore.
Nope. Patch those systems, people.
Okay, switching gears again. Prime Minister Modi in India, He had some interesting things to say about cybersecurity.
Yeah, he spoke at a national security conference recently, really emphasized the importance of protecting critical infrastructure, specifically ports.
Right, ports are so crucial for trade and transportation.
He made the point that cybersecurity in that sector, the maritime domain, it's essential for national security, for economic stability.
It's something we don't always think about, but it makes sense. What else did he focus on?
He talked about the growing threat of digital fraud, crimes that are using AI. It's clear he's pushing law enforcement agencies to step up their game.
Using technology to fight technology-driven crime.
Exactly. He's calling for technology-driven reforms in policing. We're talking AI, data analytics, anything that can help them prevent and respond to these crimes more effectively.
It sounds like India is taking a very forward-thinking approach to cybersecurity.
Absolutely. And it goes to show this is a global challenge, and we need to constantly adapt and innovate to stay ahead of the threats.
That's a great point to end on. It's been a fascinating look at the ever-changing world of cybersecurity.
It really has lots to think about.
If you want to stay on top of all the latest developments, make sure you check out Cybersecurity HQ. We've got in-depth reports, expert analysis, and a whole community of cybersecurity professionals sharing their insights.
We're talking a community of over 70,000 people. And don't forget about our weekly newsletter. It's the best way to stay informed about the latest threats and trends.
That's all for today. Until next time, stay vigilant and stay secure.